It's very good to see you, my friend. How's it going?
Great, Felix. It's awesome. Like, well, we have Corona right now. I'm in Mexico City, but other than that, I think life is beautiful. I can't complain.
All right, that's good. And you said you're in Mexico City right now, correct?
Yeah, I'm in Mexico City. I've been here since the beginning of the year.
Beginning of the year. How are things there?
Things are crazy, a little hectic. We have had a little of the same curve that the United States. We shut down pretty early, and now cases keep coming up and coming up and coming up, and the curve is not going down. But everything is open already, or it's starting to be open. So it's kind of weird because the virus is still out there, but at the same time, we are starting to go back to normal. So, well, that's the situation right now.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. And I believe you kept yourself busy in the last couple of months.
Oh yeah. Well, for starters, I just came back from USC, so where I met you in January, and I'm in the middle of two ventures that started a couple of years ago. One of them is Hunters, which is a content hub, a content platform where we create digital content, sometimes for brands, sometimes for our own sake because we like it. And the Collective Academy, which is an educational startup. So both ventures started a while ago, and the coronavirus pandemic just like pushed them up because both things were based on asset-free online working, doing stuff like very lean. So people being stuck there in their homes, what they ran to do is like, okay, what can I do with all this time at home? I'll just go and educate myself. So online learning went up, and we were like right there in the middle of on the spiral. And content production, a lot of brands and a lot of other content producers made us a call and said like, hey, we want to do stuff. We want to do stuff. So work has been busy, definitely.
No, but it's a good thing, especially right now. It's always good to be busy, especially in what you're doing and what you love, what you're doing, right?
Well, I've always said that work is an non-stoppable, force, and it will never be over. If you, as much as you work, you will have more work. Yeah. You will never be done with work, and there's no unless you're fired, you have no work to do whatsoever. But if you have a job and you're busy, you keep working, you will just have more work. You will just discover that there's more to be done. So I try to keep the balance between doing stuff that I like and that it needs to be done, but also relaxing and having a good time.
That's great. I mean, even you mentioned even if you're fired, then you have work to do on yourself, I would say, pretty much.
Yeah. There's people that says like looking for a job is a full-time job. And I agree with that. Like if you really want to nail a job and you're looking for it, what you should be doing is working, because when you get into like a job interview, you need to, and I'm starting to get into our topic today, but you need a story to tell, you need to tell the recruiter, hey, what have you been doing for the past 6 months? And you just say like, oh no, I just been on the couch waiting for a job to show up. It's like, interesting. That's how you react to boredom. Whereas as you are, okay, well, the last 6 months while I was looking for a job, I've been producing 2 documentaries on my own, and I've been doing this Facebook page, and I've been doing this podcast, and I've been busy. Actually, I've been busy and doing stuff. Oh, that's interesting. That tells me a lot about you.
I couldn't have done a better transition to our topic right now, because I'm super excited and I really appreciate you being on the show to talk about storytelling. And you have been an entrepreneur your life. You have been a creator, digital media creator with Hunter, with the Collective Academy. And what is it that makes storytelling so important? And how did you get to storytelling in the first place?
Well, I'll be honest with you, my man. Storytelling is in my life. Like I couldn't be wherever I've been without that particular skill and focus, because let's say we all consume the world in stories. And I've always been a storyteller myself since I was a little kid. I'll give you an example just for your amusement. When I was like 4 years old, I think it was 4 years old, more or less. I love to have audiobooks. I don't know if you're old enough to remember audiobooks, but audiobooks were this like Disney audiobooks where you were like reading the Pinocchio, but you will put the cassette or the CD, and the recording machine will be reading the book for you while you were like swiping the pages and looking at the drawing. So it was like a narration, kind of what you do with Audible right now, but with the drawings. No, so I was so into those stories, like I was so into reading that I learned those books from memory. But I couldn't read. I was just listening to the voice telling the stories, but I learned them. So one time I'm outside in a family meeting reunion, and I have my books, and I'm just by myself in the corner with my books, and I'm reading or pretending to be reading because I didn't know how to read, but I knew the words exactly from the recording. So I'm just like, okay, and I'm reading the book, and suddenly one of my aunts comes like, dude, are you reading? And I'm like, yes, I'm reading. Okay, show me. And I'm like, yeah, well, Pinocchio used to, and I start reading. And she was like, come on, this kid is a genius. Like, he's 3 years old and he's reading like fluently. What she didn't know is like, I knew from memory those readings. And I think I tell this story about this because the way we consume the world is from the stories that people tell us and how we perceive ourselves inside those stories. So for me, it has been always very important to let people use their imagination to fill the holes in a particular story. So I grew up being a performer, or aiming to be a performer in music, and very, very short in my career, I figured out, and my parents like encouraged me to say, okay, but go to college, study something. So I wanted to be a performer. I got into communications. My bachelor degree was communications because it was like very similar. And that merger got me into graphic design. So I started doing graphic design because I wanted to help my artist friends to do their covers of their albums and to the photo shoots of what they were doing. So I early in my life, I discovered that I was very good for telling stories and showing what people wanted to say or convey in an image or in an audio or in a film. So that was like the initial steps of my career in storytelling. And it's funny because you say you're an entrepreneur. And yeah, when I transitioned after college to going into entrepreneurship, and it started my first entrepreneurship project was starting my own communications agency. So I was like, okay, let's build up an agency and do something with the skills we have and cater all these musicians and artists that they need a good way to tell their story. So I've been producing music videos since I was 16 or 15 with my friends. Like, hey, I'll do your video, I'll shot your video, or doing graphic design for their cover arts. Or then I got into theater and I started doing marketing and communications for theater plays. So one thing has led to another. But to sum it all up, I will say I've always been close in the world of entertainment and media. And what I've seen in the world of entertainment and media, when I translate that into my entrepreneurship, startup world, and business perspective, is that people want to be entertained. They don't want to be amused. They don't want a boring story. That's why we adore Mark Zuckerberg's story. That's why we adore Elon Musk's story. Like, their stories are the part that cater to our brain, the part of our brain that wants to be amused. So I think that's one of the best parts of working in telling stories.
Exactly. And as you said, it taps into our emotions. So with the great story behind everything, we somehow trigger also this empathy between each other. And this makes it so compelling when we speak in stories rather than narratives, because usually people are not trained to talk in stories, rather in facts and details. But what it makes really compelling and gets people attention is this compelling storytelling they can relate to, that triggers empathy, that triggers this emotional intelligence also. And this is how they really listen to you and actually remember something and take something from it, right?
Totally. And this happens instantly when your brain perceives that you're going to get a story. Actually, I will encourage everyone listening to this and you to start most of your conversations with that, let me tell you a story. And when you say that, it's like, let me tell you this. People, our brain gets ready for it. It's like, okay, there's a story coming. There's a story about to come, and I need to put my brain in the mode that I'm going to catch the natural curve of the story, which is there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an ending. So people is expecting to get this from you or whoever is telling a story. And that's why when people is bad at telling jokes, for example, you're a comedian, you're like, oh, no, that didn't work because something was odd. Either the beginning, you didn't set up, you didn't prep correctly, you didn't deliver through the middle with the plots that you should have, and you didn't have a good ending. So something happened along the story that it was like made it crappy. That's why it's very important to understand the architecture of storytelling.
I mean, that's correct. And it's really not even only in movies and television like this, but in real life stories. And as you mentioned, stand-up comedy, when I'm on stage, as a comedian, you want to have a coherent story. You don't want to just have joke after joke after joke that don't relate to each other. You want to have them as combined as a coherent story so people can follow from the beginning to the middle to the end. Plus, they also want to have some sort of hero in this story. And I don't mean heroes in terms of the Marvel superheroes, Batman or like DC or like Iron Man hero, but everyday heroes like you and me, heroes like people out there. We are our own heroes in our stories, and especially in comedy, these stories make the people relate. Once they can relate, they listen to you. It triggers empathy, and it makes it just more compelling. And this is the great key and the great concept behind it. That is not only if you tell jokes or if you're pitching an idea, it's just if you have a conversation with your buddy, right?
And it's very interesting that you mentioned the hero word, because one of the main frameworks for storytelling is this hero journey. For everyone listening, you just need to go to Google and literally write hero journey, and you're gonna watch and learn all about it. It's just a structural way of storytelling that it makes it easy for everyone to understand a story, because as you said, we are our own heroes. So when I'm going to tell you a story, I'm placing myself in this hero role. This is my story, and I have a goal, which I tend to achieve. And at the end, and in between me and the goal, there are some little barriers that I'm going to try to overcome. And in the journey for me to overcome those barriers is what's going to happen. It's interesting stuff. So it doesn't matter if you're just structuring a pitch deck or a 10-year series. You need to respect kind of those rules. And the reason why you need to respect those rules or try to play along those rules, maybe bend them a little bit and try to be a little transgressive. But at the end, it's just about what was this about? What was the objective of this hero? What was he supposed to do? And how did he or she overcame all these barriers? That's what makes the story rich. Even if it's a comedy or a drama or whatever, it's just the same.
It totally is. And to bring it back to the hero narrative, and you mentioned it, every hero somehow overcame a problem in the story. And this is true for personal life events, business events, comedy, more creative events. And what I'm meaning by this is that you have the hero, whether it's be you or somebody else you tell the story about, and then this hero is faced with a problem, with an obstacle. It gets first introduced to this problem, like in a movie, pretty much, and then eventually it will get at first defeated by this problem or obstacle, but through reflecting, processing, and becoming better, it then eventually at the end overcomes and beats this monster, this problem, this obstacle, which rounds up the entire story. So in a way, even if it's a typical hero story we see in movies, or if you struggled in college, if you had some family issues you had to deal with, you had to overcome with, whether you have been fired from your job right now during COVID, there will be great stories also coming out of this. And it makes them so compelling, just that it has this narrative of getting exposed to the monster, getting defeated by it at first, but then improving, reflecting, and beating the monster in the long run.
And I'll give you a perfect example of that throughout my experience when I was living 2 years in LA. So as I was telling you, I came from a career when I was very, very focused in media and entertainment. And then I kind of started shifting into marketing. When I graduated my university, I got a job in a communications agency, digital. So we were kind of pioneering all this Facebook and Twitter world back then in 2010. So we started like creating all this marketing techniques for brands like Coca-Cola, Domino's Pizza, Cinépolis, and all those big brands. So I was always, since I did knew how to read very early in my life. That time I was pretending, but I did learn very early. Yeah. So I was advanced 1 year in kindergarten. Mm-hmm. So that made me be the smallest kid in my generation, and throughout elementary, secondary school, college, all this stuff, I always was like 1 year younger than everyone else. So when I graduated and I started my career, I had a lot of set of skills that I could use in the job market that were not very typical. So I was a designer, but I was also like, I could write, but I could do a lot of stuff. But I was going through a career that it was more like a desk kind of thing. So both skills helped me grow very, very, very quick in my career. Jump to, I was 25-ish, yeah, 25-ish, and I was already the head of a business unit in an agency. I was having a great career, and in my hero journey, I would say I was like in the best moment of my life. Like, dude, you're 25, you're making a lot of money, you are the head of this agency, you're doing all this stuff, and then the real entrepreneurship came by. So I got invited to join a startup, a tech startup, and I've always been very eager for tech. I was like, no, I love tech. Singularity University I had attended and all that kind of stuff. So it was like very techy, very geeky. And I said, yeah, I want to be like Steve Jobs. He's my hero. He made a startup, so I need to jump to the startup world, whatever. And then I went through that abyss that the hero goes, because I was used to be the brightest guy in the room. And then when I came into entrepreneurship, I was like, fuck. I know nothing. Like, I don't know anything about Excel. I don't know anything about business models, math, big data, all that stuff. I'm very used to my creative niche. And I faced this like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. So that made me go like into this like call to adventure, let's say, in the hero journey. It was like, okay, let's do this. This is new. And I started going through my phase. When I learned that I didn't know as much as that I was not as smart as I thought, I said, okay, I need to go to school. So that's why I said, okay, I need to go to business school. Let's go to USC. Let's move to LA, all that kind of stuff. And I didn't really recognize that one of the things that really changed me and empowered me that much is that being in LA gave me an opportunity to tell my story to a lot of people. So when you move yourself to a place that no one really knows you, you need to tell your story a very frequent number of times, because you need to introduce yourself every fucking time. It's like, hi, I'm Jorge. I'm 29 years old. I'm doing this. This is my background. So you continuously tell your story. And what it was very magical for me, and this is something that I've never confessed, but now you're going to have this. I started creating versions of my story just to taunt, just to see what happened with myself. So I was out in a bar, David Wayne's, and I will meet a girl, and I was like, what's your name? I will probably change my name. Well, I will probably start telling some parts of my story, not the whole of it, just to try to phrase myself differently. I wouldn't say, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I would start saying, yeah, I'm a music producer, which I am. But it had been 10 years since I'd said it. So I started just saying like, hey, I'm a music producer. Hey, to define myself with other things that I have never said to anyone else. And that gave me a new whole perspective of myself. So I will sum all this up saying this, like the greatest story that you're ever going to tell is the one that you tell to yourself. You know, that's the greatest story you will ever tell. If you can't tell yourself the story that you want to live, and you can structure their story so you can see it clearly, everyone else is going to believe it. And therefore, you're going to start moving forward to that goal that you have. And that's why I think storytelling is very important, because if you don't have your own ending, if you cannot visualize your own story, your own careers, your own hero journey, then it's impossible for you to be attractive or to create other kinds of stories. You need to start with your own story. That's my reflection on all this.
I love it. I love it. And what I love especially is that you mentioned the part about the ending, that you have to be aware and kind of know or visualize your ending. And this goes back to whether it's comedy writing, writing for a drama, for an action, whatever it is.
Yeah.
If you have an ending in mind first, it makes the beginning way easier, because you know where you eventually end up in. It's the same for stand-up. It's the same for comedy. It's the same for everything. It doesn't mean that you have to know where you end up with, but you have to be able to visualize it. And based on this, you can tell your story.
Yeah, like you, for example, when you started, you said, I'm gonna go into comedy. Have you ever done comedy in your life before?
No, not even thought about it.
So you said, okay, I'm gonna do this. But I'm guessing you kind of have an ending in your mind. I don't think it was like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna be the greatest comedian the world has ever seen, because probably you could do it, but it would be like a very, very ambitious goal. But you had kind of, okay, if I can perform decently in an audience in front of a comedy store in Los Angeles, California, that's a pretty nice ending. That's a story to tell my kids. Like, kids driving through Los Angeles, that place? I used to perform there. I have the pictures.
Yep.
So that's a nice story.
It is.
If you have an ending, then you motivate yourself to say, okay, let me see how can I do it. Let's just start there in that little open mic.
And this is so funny, because when I started my first comedy class, this class came with an optional show at the Comedy Store. So we kind of had like our graduation show at the Comedy Store where you've been. And I said, I'm totally going to do it. Even if I will bomb, even if I will suck at my show, I have a great story to tell. And this is what I told myself every time going through every class. I said, I'm pretty new to it. I've never done something like this before, but I know I have a show coming up, and I know I will perform. And even if I suck, I have a great story to tell for everyone.
Yeah, like storytelling is everywhere, and it starts in your mind. For example, the other day I was talking with my brother, and we were comparing how do you like video games?
Yeah.
Kind of. Do you play FIFA?
We should. Okay.
So the people that likes FIFA, there's a various ways of playing. You can play against other people online and all this stuff, but there's one particular mode that is called career mode, which I guess everyone plays, but it's a very personal mode, because no one will ever see what are your achievements or whatever you're doing. You cannot brag about your career mode with your friends. It's just like your career mode. And career mode is based on the fact that you choose whether to be a player and grow your career and be hired in a very small team, and then grow your career all the way to Barcelona, the greatest team ever, or being a manager. Being a manager is also available. And what is interesting is how people chooses to develop that career. So for example, we had a friend and he was saying like, no, when I start career mode, I go for Real Madrid immediately, and I go and win the Champions, and I'm 10 times the winner of a Champions League, like straight. Never been done, but I do it because I'm the manager of that team. And that tells you something about the story this person is trying to tell to himself. Whereas, for example, myself, I love the underdog story. So I always go for a third division team in Germany or in England, and I try to develop players from the beginning, and I go through the next division, get to the Premier League, qualify to the struggling all the way through, and I celebrate when I tie with the Real Madrid or with the Manchester City. It's like, oh, I did it, I tied. So for the most part of my 5-year career mode, it's losing. It's basically losing and losing and losing. And my brother says like, why would you play this? Just like for losing? It's like, because I'm getting better. Like I'm getting better. So part of all this world consumption is what is the story that you're trying to tell to yourself and that therefore there to the world. And whatever you choose to do, I will always encourage people to see the story behind what they're doing, because you can just tell people, hey, I moved to California and I went to USC and I came back to Mexico and it was fun. And that's the lamest story you'll ever hear. Because, oh my God, all the things that you have been living in your journey in California, all the things that I lived and all our classmates lived. But you cannot, the devil is in the details that you choose to share and how you put them right next to each other so they can create a very compelling story.
Of course, yeah. You brought up a great point, because you could easily find yourself telling something, whether it's the biggest life event, in just one sentence, and people will forget it immediately, and it doesn't have any value behind it. And it doesn't have any meaning, any drive, purpose, passion, whatever it is, nothing without a great story. But it's actually not our fault, because we don't really get taught in school being great storytellers. It's not what we naturally are, what we naturally born. So we learn it and we experience and we play around with it. So how can we actually be better storytellers? Like, what are the steps we can make to, just to tell greater stories, whether it's about our stuff, our business, to our significant others, whether it's about our next dinner plans, whatever it is.
One of the things that I will add for this answer, I would say, I always recommend people to read this book by Austin Kleon called Share Your Work, which is basically principles of storytelling. And what Austin Kleon says is like, you need to be more, first, number one is conscious. You need to be more conscious about the stories. And what this means is what we've just been doing for the last 10, 15 minutes of our talk, which is, let's understand that there's more than just one sentence from this. We can tell a big story because there's characters, there's people in it. And these people has backgrounds and motivations and objectives and barriers. So even if it's just a story of one man, there are characters around it. If this is a story of how Felix Day turned himself into a better comedian of LA, there are characters around him. There are the supporter characters. There are the teachers. There are the enemies. And that's the number two I always choose people to tell people to look for, which is, what's the enemy? Let's look for the enemy in this story. Because if you don't have an enemy, the story is going to be boring. There has to be some counter force that it's impeding you from achieving your goal. So it doesn't have to be really a physical enemy. It doesn't have to be like a bad guy or a bad girl. For example, in your case, I would probably say the enemy is your stage fear.
Myself, exactly.
Yourself. Your own perception that you cannot do it, your own whatever it's around that. It's no one is actually standing in front of Felix to impede him, to avoid him, to becoming a great comedian. It's just whatever he feels of himself, his barriers, all those kind of stuff. So you need to tell the story of how you overcame those barriers. And that would be interesting for other people. Because like, oh, so this guy couldn't talk until he was 6. I'm just making this shit up, but probably it's like, you know what? I couldn't talk until I was 6 years old. What? And now you're a comedian? Tell me how that happened. That's interesting. My dad always used to tell me this or this or this, and that's why I developed this shyness. Oh, interesting. So how do you make it? Because now you made it. And that's interesting part of the story. So I would say those 3 things. Be conscious that there is a story to tell, and identify the elements on the story that you're going to tell. Who are these little characters around you?
Supporting characters. Yeah.
And who's the enemy? And basically, I think that's pretty much it. That's what you need to complete this story. Obviously, in the first part, I don't want to overlook this word, which is the goal. I said it before. In the identifying the part that is a story, there should be a goal. So for example, if you're turning yourself into let's go back to startup world where we belong. So in startup world, you do a lot of pitching. You're pitching your business all over the place all the time. When you're pitching, and a lot of venture capitalists will tell you this, and you know it, is the most important thing is your story. Like, a pitch will not get you a check. A pitch will get you a next meeting. That's what it's worth, the pitch. It will get you to the next meeting. And to get to the next meeting, you need to be compelling. And the venture capitalists, you want them to be thinking, hey, I want to know more about this guy, about this stuff. So you don't need to go and show your big data and dashboard and your curve that you've been growing and all this stuff. You need to give them a reason to call you the next morning. And that's the same thing when you're flirting in a bar. And that's the same thing when you are trying to get into school. It's just the way you tell them, okay, I want to build the next USC, like the next university of 2050, I want to build that. I want to rechange education. And this is how I'm going to do it. Blah, 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 blah. These are my barriers. These are my enemies. And this is your role in my story, which is give me this motherfucking check. But you need to make them feel that they're going to be part of that awesome story that you're going to build.
Exactly. And there's one common thing in everything you just said, and this brings me back actually to your FIFA story, is the problem, the obstacles. Because as you said, you like to be, when you play FIFA, the underdog. You know, you want to upgrade to get to the next division, and somehow David versus Goliath story.
Yeah.
And what the great thing about this is nobody in life had a life without obstacles. So when you have a story to tell about obstacles and how you overcame them, that's a way better story than just saying, I was winning my entire life. And there's no such story as winning your entire life, even for the greatest guys here. And same as with pitching. And as you said, the story, especially if you're a super early stage startup, the story is the thing that gets the investors hooked. And usually when you tell your story, you tell about your problem you encountered yourself, you encountered with your friends or families, and how you overcame this problem, or how you thought about a solution for this problem. So you already had this problem in your story, and you tell them how you think you can overcome it. And that's the story.
And if you think about just what you said, imagine this. The whole human race it's been directed and controlled by whoever determines the storytelling, you know? Whoever determines the storytelling gets to tell the rest of the people what's correct and what's not in a massive scale. So, for example, right now that we're seeing through the Black Lives Matter movement, one of the most amazing things that this movement has put outside is the great controlling of the story of the, let's say, status quo. The I don't want to point fingers at white guys, whatever. And it's just like the status quo has controlled the story in a way that has normalized a lot of stuff. And what they're trying to do, rather than fighting back and creating a revolution, is controlling the narrative. Like, we want to control the narrative now. We want to tell the story. So this guy didn't die for natural causes. We want to tell the right story. And the right story is a police cop put a knee in the neck of a guy with no reason and killed him. And that made a lot of things to burst into this whole Black Lives Matter movement. But it's a second wave, not like Martin Luther King kind of thing, which is like, okay, we need to protest and we need to defend. It's right now, I would say it's a war for the storytelling, for controlling the narrative, and putting outside another side of that narrative that is important, because before we just had one side. And that side normalized a lot of things that make people that are a little not less educated say, no, I'm not racist, but I think that if you want to have a black Little Mermaid, why don't you just create another character for black people? It's like, dude, that's racism, but you don't know. And it's fine. But the narrative that is going to start a good flow from the next 20 to 30 years is going to make things right. And do air quotations here, right? Because I'm pretty sure that in 20 years, we're going to encounter a secondary problem, from that narrative, because it's not going to be perfect. And things are going to be broken in 20 years when all this movement has come to an end or to a calmer spot. It's going to be like, okay, now there's another group of people that feels that they have not been controlling the narrative and they have been overlooked. And this is just a human life cycle, because that's why this hero journey framework, it's very interesting, because it's not just for your personal story or for a story of a Marvel character. It's also humankind's story. Humankind is also in its own hero journey. And sometimes it's a call to war, and sometimes it's in the abyss, and sometimes it's in blooming. But it depends on who is in the controller, who is managing the Mario at the moment. Those who control the narrative are the ones that are in control of the status quo. And that's what's changing right now.
I love control the narrative, change the narrative. The human story keeps changing. I love it. I absolutely love it. And just to bring it back, I know it's very hard to get into great storytelling just from one day to the other, but I love your advice about being self-aware and being aware that everybody has a story to tell, plus having this obstacle that you overcame through your process. And what I would maybe add to this, when I thought about how I could personally start being a better storyteller, and this is what the professor told me, is that a great story, no matter what the story is about, always has a date, it has a location, and it has some sorts of dialogue and conversation. Let's say, again, talking about comedy. I started comedy back in September. That's a date. And I started actually here in LA. I've never done it in Germany. I started in LA because, and now the dialogue conversation comes into play, one of my professors at USC asked us to do something that takes us out of our comfort zone. And this just creates this trigger, or this triggers the story that people want to follow. Okay, what happens next? What happened then? So just with like 3 simple tricks of having a location and a conversation that happened at that time. It's an automatic trigger that keeps them engaged. And I think this is, it's hard always to follow, obviously, but when we think about this, and then also on top of it, having the obstacle to overcome, let's say myself, my stage fright, whatever it is. Yeah, this is a great story, and this is what makes every story great. And there you are, you're a storyteller.
I will add a couple of things that I think are important for people to consider when they're doing it. From the ones that you said, like a date and all that stuff. You know this from comedy TV. You need to start with a hook all the time. Like the first 10 minutes of a movie, of the first page of a book, the first impression is important for people. So you need to think, what is going to be this first impression that you're going to make? How you're going to create this first impression? Also, timing. The right time to tell the story is important. Sometimes we want to tell long stories when people just do not have time. Sometimes we're too brief, and we tell them very shortly when we could have done further. So timing for the story, it's very important. To show, don't tell. Also, and there are some things that you want to show. So, for example, if you are in a bar, you're picking up a girl or a guy, and you're using a story, and you're telling her about that time that you were backpacking in Europe. If you can pull out a prop, you can say, like, actually, I got this from whatever. Say, show, don't tell. Props and things help a lot, because imagination has its limits. And if you're going to use imagination, I will add, you need to use vivid details, not lots of facts. So in a story, facts don't really matter. One of my favorite movies of all time, I have a lot of them. One of them is The Big Short. Have you ever seen The Big Short? It's an amazing movie from this documentary book made by this guy that also made Moneyball, like stories that are documentary of real life. So The Big Short uses a great thing that is, there were a lot of facts involved and a lot of numbers, but they didn't went through that. They told the story about the 2008 crisis through vivid details of little persons that were living that particular moment in time. So I think details are very much important than facts. Something else, it's practice related skills. Because if you want to become a great storyteller, you need to become a good conscious person of your voice. So you can lower your voice like this, and you can go in a higher pitch like this and start telling a story in a different way. So if you start using your voice and you're going to use it, then you need to be conscious about it. Your body movements, like use your hands, use your stuff. So there's a lot of things that you can do to get better in storytelling. Get a little personal. That always works in storytelling. So relate yourself to the story that you're trying to tell. Entrepreneurship is how do you relate it to this thing. Flirting, it's tell something about yourself that it's kind of personal. If you share this firsthand thoughts and feelings that feel really you, people are going to be like attracted because you seem more natural, more honest.
Exactly. You are being more vulnerable. And I could talk about this for hours and hours, and I love the topic. And I think it's a crucial topic for everybody. But I also want to be respectful with your time.
Don't worry.
I really appreciate you being on the show. And this was a great podcast, a great episode. And I wish I will have you back one time, anytime soon. Where you can.
I wish we can do it live, face to face.
This hopefully still in 2020, man. I really hope so. Last thing, if people might want to reach out to you, where could they reach you?
My name is Jorge Fajardo, and I'm like that in every place, like Twitter, Instagram, at Jorge Fajardo. I would spell it out, but I think you're going to write it somewhere. People will see it. And always open to chat with you and whatever wants to have a little conversation about stories. I have shit tons of them.
With that, my friend, thank you so much, and have a great day. And I hope to see you soon, all right?
Thank you. Be safe. Stay safe. Enjoy LA. I'll visit you soon.
Bye, buddy.
Goodbye.